The poem today is David Wagoner's poem, The Silence of the Stars. So let us begin with the poem. In order just to know, to frame the poem, there was a person named Lawrence van der Post who is credited, justly or not, with having saved the Bushmen in that vast expanse of empty desert in Africa, the Kalihari Desert. And the Bushmen in this huge, huge expanse of land are the only inhabitants when Lawrence van der Post comes to save the Kalahari Desert. The Bushmen, of course, are seen as primitives. When Lawrence van der Post, one night in the Kalahari Desert, told the Bushmen he couldn't hear the stars singing, they didn't believe him. They looked at him, half smiling. They examined his face to see whether he was joking or deceiving them. Then two of these small men who plant nothing, who have almost nothing to hunt, who live on almost nothing, and with no one but themselves, led him away from the crackling thorn-scrub fire, and stood with him under the night sky and listened. One of them whispered, "Do you not hear them now?" And van der Post listened, not wanting to disbelieve, but had to answer, no. They walked him slowly, like a sick man, to the small, dim circle of firelight and told him they were terribly sorry, and he felt even sorrier for himself and blamed his ancestors for their strange loss of hearing, which was his loss now. On some clear night, when nearby houses have turned off their visions, when the traffic dwindles, when through streets are between sirens and the jets overhead are between crossings, when the wind is hanging fire in the fir trees and the long-eared owl in the neighboring grove between calls is regarding his own darkness. I look at the stars as I first did to school myself in the names of constellations and remember my first sense of their terrible distance. I can still hear what I thought at the edge of silence were the inside jokes of my heartbeat, my arterial traffic, the sea above the high sea of my inner ear, myself tunelessly humming. But now I know what they are. My fair share of the music of the spheres and clusters of ripening stars, of the songs from the throats of the old gods still tending ever tone-dead creatures through their exiles in the desert. Now, of course, those people who are exiled in the desert are not the desert men, the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, who take the modern man out into the night sky to gaze up at the stars and to hear the stars singing. The exiles in the desert are, of course, we who are in the desert of our visions, that we somehow turn off our visions. And of course, the turning off of our visions when nearby houses have turned off their visions, are the televisions that we watch, when the traffic dwindles and the noise of the jets disappears. And then we hear the music of the stars rather than the silence of the stars. On the surface, of course, and to a great extent it's true, this is a poem about the ravages of modern civilization and the loss of the sense of wonder in nature. Most of us live in a world in which we don't see the stars in the skies. We have to go to a planetarium to see the stars. Or, if we're lucky, to be in the middle of the desert. Or if we're very lucky, to be in the Kalihari Desert, where artificial light and smog doesn't hide the stars from us. But we're now teaching this. We're now learning this from the Torah standpoint. And the question right away is, how can we understand, even though Shir HaShirim is the greatest mashal, it is the greatest metaphor for the love of God. It is a great metaphor for the receiving of the Torah. How can we understand the nimshal, the meaning of the metaphor, if we have no sense of the wonder of nature? If we are to pray with the words of Tehillim, Hashamayim Misaprim Kavod Kel, if we are to pray and say, the heavens tell, they speak the glory of God, Yom Liyom Yabia Omer, Ein Omer Vein Dvarim, Beli Nishma Kolam, right? There is a voice, and it's the voice that we don't hear. Well, we say if there's a voice that you don't hear, then obviously there's no voice. You rationalists, right? A voice always has a sound. We'll come back to that in a moment. But neither do we understand Kabbalat Shabbat. We who have never trekked through the vast forests, have listened to the wind rustling the leaves in the vast forests, Atzei Asodeh, the trees of the field, of the forests that are singing the praise of God, the Creator. The silence of the stars, indeed, it's the music of the stars, because silence, when properly heard, has a sound. Now, lest you think I'm trying to put a poem over on you, let's return to words we know from Tefillah, and indeed, words that are familiar to many. And it's part of the great piyut, the great poem of Unatana Tokef that we recite on the Yomim Noraim, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we speak, Uva shofar gadol yitaka v'kol demama daka yishama. A great shofar is sounded. What is heard? A great sound, a frightening noise. Kol demama daka yishama. What is heard is the sound of demama daka. Now this phrase, kol demama daka, which frightens the angels, which frightens the angels of heaven in the piyut of Unatana Tokef. This phrase, kol demama daka, actually comes from the story of Eliyahu in Malachim, book 1, chapter 19, in which Eliyahu escapes to the desert and escapes to Har Chorev, to Har Sinai, wanting to cast aside the burden, the difficulty of dealing with the people Israel. And God asks him, what are you doing here, Eliyahu? And Eliyahu gives the answer that the people are really a problem. And God says, come out of the cave in which you're hiding. Perhaps we could call it the cleft of the rock, bearing the memory of where Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to have his ultimate rendezvous with God at Sinai in Parshat Ki Sisa. But for now, we'll stay in Melachim. And God is going to come and speak to him. God says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Vayomer Tsev amarta v'har lifnei Hashem. Go out and stand on the mountain before God. V'nei Hashem over, God passes by. V'ruach gedolah, great wind that breaks the rock. A whirlwind comes, and lo beruach Hashem. God is not in the wind, in the sound of the wind, in the power of the wind. And next comes an earthquake, a rash, and God is not in the rash. And then comes an aish, lo ba'aish Hashem, not in the noise, not in the sound of the earthquake, nor in the crackling fire, not of a crackling thorn bush fire, but of a great fire, a conflagration. It's not there. And then the achara eish, and after the fire, kol d'mama daka, kol d'mama daka. Now, kol, the sound of the mama, silence, daka, very fine. In the King James translation, there's a majestic phrase, the still small voice. The still small voice. Beautiful, but it's not what the pasuk says. God is in the kol d'mama daka, the sound of silence, the sound of very, very quiet, fine, daka, thin silence. And in that sound, hearing the wonder of the sound of silence. Of course, those of you who play music or those of you who read poetry know that silence is as much of the music, or if you're a physicist, you know that as well. Silence is as much of a wonder or a part of the music as silence is part of reading a poem. Commas, line breaks, stanzas are all moments of greater or lesser silence. And our problem is that we have visions that are dependent upon noise and only on noise. And we can't hear the silence, the sound of silence. Malachim yechafezun, the angels hear it when the great shofar gives the greatest sound, the most profound sound, and it's the sound of silence, and they tremble in awe. They tremble in awe. And we register sound only by noise. There was a minor hurricane when I was growing up near the Jersey Shore, Long Branch. And my mother wanted me to learn something about nature. And one of the things I learned, we went near the beach on the boardwalk. We weren't in danger, but nonetheless, it was a hurricane. And there was tremendous noise. But I heard something behind the noise. And I think that my mother, Alel Shalom of blessed memory, wanted me to hear that too. Because there were the moments when the noise would suddenly stop and there would be this overwhelming silence. And in that silence, there was the presence of something beyond the noise. The kol d'mama daka, the still small voice, that spoke to Eliyahu, the still small voice of the stars singing the glory of God in the music of the spheres, and the tragedy that all too often in life we don't find anything but noise.